The quantum static crackling of hyperspace displacement announced the Zortak fleet's arrival long before visual confirmation. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the holographic display with a mixture of terror and calculated resolve, her dark eyes reflecting the cascading threat vectors materializing around New Horizon colony. 17 massive obsidian warships emerged like predatory shadows, each vessel larger than the entire colonial defense grid. Their biomechanical hull designs pulsed with an iridescent menace, living metal that seemed to breathe with anticipation of destruction. Zortak technology represented the pinnacle of galactic warfare, a fact they never hesitated to demonstrate. Threat assessment, Elena commanded, her voice steady despite the apocalyptic scene unfolding around her. Lieutenant Marcus Chen's fingers danced across holographic interfaces, filtering real-time data streams. 17 primary vessels. Estimated ground force, approximately 50,000 combat-ready troops. Plasma cannons charge. Gravitational compression weapons detected. They're not here for negotiation. The colony's defense systems hummed with a desperate, almost feudal energy. New Horizon was a frontier settlement, established just 7 years ago on the edge of explored space. 12,000 colonists, scientists, engineers, their families, stood between these alien invaders and total annihilation. Elena knew the Zortak's reputation. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were xenophobic predators who viewed other species as resources to be consumed or eliminated. Their culture celebrated total war, with ritualistic practices that transformed planetary conquest into a form of cultural performance. What the Zortak didn't know was that humanity had been preparing for precisely this moment. The first plasma strikes began to rain down, superheated energy weapons that could vaporize entire city blocks in milliseconds. Standard military doctrine would dictate immediate evacuation or desperate defensive maneuvers. But Elena Rodriguez was anything but standard. A slight smile, more predatory than reassuring, crossed her lips. "Initiate Chimera Protocol," she whispered into her command channel. Across the colony, specially trained teams that looked like nothing more than medical responders, emergency workers, and humanitarian aid personnel began to move with choreographed precision. Their true mission was about to begin, and it had nothing to do with traditional warfare. The Zortak believed they were launching an overwhelming invasion. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon was never its technology, but its profound, almost terrifying capacity to understand and manipulate complex systems, including the most intricate system of all, the enemy's own society. As plasma struck the outer defensive perimeters and the first ground troops began their descent, Captain Rodriguez watched and waited. The real battle was just beginning, and it would be fought in a way no galactic civilization had ever conceived. Humanity was going to war, but not the war anyone expected. The first Zortak drop pods crashed into New Horizon's perimeter with earth-shattering force, releasing clouds of metallic spores and advanced combat biomechanoids. Standard military units would have engaged in direct confrontation. Instead, the human response was maddeningly subtle. Dr. Aria Kalinowski moved with practiced calm, her emergency medical response uniform pristine against the chaos. To any observing Zortak drone, she appeared to be a standard human relief worker. In reality, she was the mastermind of the most audacious extraction operation in human history. Sector 3. Activate Phase 2. She murmured into a microscopic comm implant. Around her, what seemed like random clusters of medical and humanitarian workers began their intricate dance. Each team had spent years training for this exact scenario, understanding Zortak biological markers, communication patterns, and most critically, their cultural blind spots. The alien ground troops were formidable. 3-meter-tall exoskeletal warriors moved with predatory precision, their bio-augmented bodies capable of processing tactical information faster than most computer systems. Plasma rifles hummed with destructive potential, cutting through initial human defensive positions with terrifying efficiency. But they were looking for soldiers. They were not prepared for something entirely different. In the midst of the chaos, specially trained human operatives began identifying and isolating Zortak children. Each extraction was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. A wounded child here, a separated family unit there, always within the chaos of combat, always appearing as rescue operations. Zarnik, a young Zortak warrior-caste lieutenant, watched in growing confusion. Human units weren't behaving like any combatants he'd encountered in decades of galactic conflicts. They seemed more interested in protecting and removing children than engaging in direct combat. "Command, this is impossible," he transmitted to his superior. "They're collecting the offspring." The response was a burst of static, followed by increasing panic in the alien communication networks. Each rescued Zortak child was processed through a meticulously designed protocol. Medical scans, psychological evaluations, linguistic adaptation programs, all designed to do far more than simply protect. They were creating ambassadors, future bridges between two civilizations. Dr. Kalinowski watched a 6-year-old Zortak child, barely reaching her waist, being gently guided into a secured medical transport. The child's exoskeletal markings indicated high-ranking parentage, a primary target extracted with surgical precision. "Chimera protocol at 37% completion," she whispered. The first phase of humanity's most dangerous gambit was underway. Not a war of destruction, but a war of transformation. The Zortak believed they were launching an invasion. In reality, they were walking into a psychological trap so complex, so fundamentally alien to their understanding of conflict that they couldn't even perceive its existence. Humanity was rewriting the rules of engagement, one child at a time. The communication chamber of the Zortak flagship, Void Render, descended into a maelstrom of collective panic. Supreme Tactical Executor Krasnak slammed his triple-jointed fist against the holographic display, his exoskeletal carapace trembling with barely contained rage. "Explain," he demanded, his voice a low growl that vibrated the metallic walls. "How 12,000 humans are systematically neutralizing our invasion force." The tactical hologram told a story no Zortak military commander had ever witnessed. Red markers representing human extraction teams moved with impossible precision, cutting through invasion strategies like a scalpel through tissue. But it wasn't the tactical movements that broke their understanding, it was the target. Children. The Zortak were a species that elevated offspring to near mystical status. Each child represented genetic potential, cultural continuation, the very future of their civilization. Their entire social structure revolved around protecting and preparing the next generation for perpetual galactic dominance. And these humans were taking them. Not killing, not enslaving, but protecting. Lieutenant Vexera, the youngest strategic analyst in the fleet, stepped forward. Her translation implant converted her complex biological communication into standard speech. "Sir, our intelligence suggests this is more than a military operation. It's a form of psychological warfare we've never encountered." Krasnak's secondary respiratory nodes flared, a sign of extreme agitation. "Elaborate." "The human teams are not just extracting children," Vexera continued, her holographic display showing detailed tracking of each rescued child. "They're processing them through comprehensive care facilities, medical treatment exceeding our own standards, educational programs designed to integrate them." The implications were horrifying to the Zortak mindset. Warfare was supposed to be about total destruction, genetic elimination, cultural annihilation. These humans were doing something fundamentally incomprehensible. They were saving the very future the Zortak had come to crush. Intercepted communication logs began flooding the tactical displays. Rescued Zortak children were already displaying unprecedented behavioral patterns, learning human languages with frightening speed, asking questions that challenged core Zortak cultural assumptions, showing emotional ranges that their rigid society had systematically suppressed. "They're not just protecting the children," Vexera said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They're reprogramming them. The communication chamber fell into a horrified silence. Each rescued child became a living weapon more dangerous than any plasma cannon. They were cultural infiltrators, future diplomats, bridges between two civilizations, and the Zortak had delivered them voluntarily into human hands. Krasnak realized with growing terror that they weren't just losing a military engagement. They were witnessing the potential dissolution of their entire societal structure. Humanity had found a weapon more powerful than any technological marvel: the ability to transform an enemy by caring for their most precious resource. The invasion was no longer a military operation. It had become something far more complex, a battle for cultural survival that the Zortak were systematically losing, one child at a time. Zarek sat motionless in the adaptive learning chamber, his translucent neural tendrils interfacing with the holographic educational matrix. 12 standard cycles ago, he had been a child of the Zortak military elite. Now he was something entirely different. The transformation was subtle at first. Human educators didn't break the children. They invited them to question. Where Zortak education was a rigid system of memorization and cultural indoctrination, this was something else entirely. Critical thinking, empathy, imagination. Dr. Helena Rodriguez, no relation to the colony's captain, but equally strategic, watched Zarek's neural patterns with fascination. The boy was exceptional, even among the extracted children. His ability to simultaneously hold multiple perspectives was unprecedented for his species. Analyze your civilization's primary conflict resolution strategies, the learning matrix prompted. Zarek's response came not in the expected Zortak military doctrine, but in a nuanced exploration that would have been heretical mere weeks ago. Conflict is a failure of communication, he began, a breakdown of understanding rather than a natural state of interaction. The words were his, but the perspective was fundamentally human. In facilities scattered across New Horizon, hundreds of Zortak children were undergoing similar transformations. Each was a living experiment in cultural adaptation, psychological resilience, and interspecies understanding. They were being given something their own society had never offered: true choice. Captain Elena Rodriguez reviewed the preliminary reports. This was always the plan, not just rescue, but fundamental reimagining. The Zortak saw children as future weapons. Humans saw them as potential bridges. Zarek's personal file was a testament to the program's complexity. Genetically marked for high-level military leadership, he was now deconstructing the very foundations of Zortak militant culture. His neuroplasticity allowed him to absorb human concepts of cooperation, empathy, and individual agency with terrifying speed. The most dangerous weapon, Dr. Helena muttered, reviewing his latest psychological assessment, is a mind that can see beyond its original programming. In another section of the facility, a group of rescued children were engaged in a collaborative problem-solving exercise. Zortak children worked alongside human children, their differences becoming less important than their shared curiosity. They weren't just learning to coexist, they were learning to reimagine what coexistence could mean. The psychological crucible was working. Each child became a living contradiction to their species' established narrative. They were talking proof that perspective could be the most powerful transformative force in the universe. Zarek looked up, catching Dr. Helena's eye. For a moment, something passed between them. A recognition that they were part of something far larger than a simple rescue operation. This was a deliberate, carefully crafted intervention into the very fabric of two civilizations. The Zortak had come to conquer. Instead, they had delivered the seeds of their own potential redemption. The Zortak genetic conclave erupted in chaos, its pristine chambers of crystalline bioarchitecture now a battleground of unprecedented ideological conflict. What had begun as a unified military operation was rapidly dissolving into a civil war of perspectives. Matriarch Kree Lara, the eldest and most revered of the genetic lineage masters, stood at the center of the storm. Her genetic memory stretched back 17 generations, but nothing in her extensive experience had prepared her for this moment of absolute cultural disruption. "Our children," She spoke, her voice a low resonance that vibrated through the chamber, "are no longer ours." The holographic displays told a story of total societal breakdown. Zortak parents across their vast interstellar territories were discovering the fate of their extracted children. Instead of the expected trauma, they were receiving communication logs, educational records, medical reports that painted an impossible picture. Their children were thriving. Not just surviving, but developing in ways the rigid Zortak society had never considered possible. They were learning multiple languages, engaging in complex problem-solving, displaying emotional intelligence that defied their species' traditional development protocols. Representative Vornax from the military caste stood in direct opposition. "This is cultural contamination," he thundered, his exoskeletal plates flaring with aggressive biochemical signals. "The humans are weaponizing our most precious resource." But for every hardline voice, another was emerging. Parents who had received detailed reports, who had seen holographic communication from their children, were beginning to waver. The human approach was incomprehensible, but undeniably effective. A young Zortak parent named Lexera rose, her communication tendrils trembling. "My daughter is learning music," she said, her voice a mixture of confusion and wonder. "Not as a mathematical exercise, but as an expression of emotion. The humans are showing her something our society has never understood." The fractures were becoming chasms. The military wanted continued invasion. The genetic lineage masters were torn between preservation and unprecedented opportunity. Parents were discovering their children were becoming something more than the narrow definitions their society had always imposed. Captain Alina Rodriguez, monitoring the communication intercepts, allowed herself the slightest smile. This was always part of the plan. Not conquest through destruction, but transformation through understanding. The Zortak were experiencing something far more devastating than military defeat. They were confronting the possibility that their entire cultural paradigm might be fundamentally flawed. Matriarch Krelera made a decision that would echo through generations. "We will hear them," she declared. "We will listen to what our children have become." In facilities across human space, rescued Zortak children continued their unprecedented journey. They were no longer just survivors. They were becoming ambassadors, bridges between two civilizations that had previously known only conflict. The invasion was over, but the real transformation was just beginning. Supreme Tactical Executor Krasnak's personal communication chamber became a crucible of personal and professional destruction. The holographic display flickered with images of his own twin offspring, Zurich and Zerak, now residing in a human educational facility that defied every fundamental understanding of his species' approach to child rearing. His daughters were no longer the future warriors he had meticulously planned. They had become something else entirely. The first transmission arrived without warning. A detailed psychological profile, accompanied by holographic recordings that showed his children not as potential military assets, but as thinking, feeling individuals. Zurich was studying quantum mathematics through music composition. Zerak had developed a passion for xenobotanical research that challenged everything the Zortak knew about scientific methodology. "Report," he demanded of the communication specialist, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. The specialist, Lieutenant Vexera, knew she was delivering more than a report. She was presenting evidence of a total cultural revolution. "Sir," she began, her communication tendrils displaying a complexity of emotion unprecedented in Zortak military communication. "Your daughters are not just surviving. They are redefining what survival means." The holographic display showed Zurich during a collaborative problem-solving session. She was working alongside human and other extracted Zortak children, her approach collaborative rather than competitive, a fundamental violation of everything Krasnak had believed about military preparation. In the background of the recording, a human educator, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, watched with a mixture of pride and scientific curiosity. This was no ordinary educational program. It was a carefully constructed psychological intervention that was systematically dismantling the Zortak's most fundamental cultural assumptions. Krasnak's personal history was a testament to the Zortak's militant culture. 17 generations of military leadership, each child groomed from birth to be the perfect warrior. And now, his own offspring were becoming something he could barely comprehend. They are learning, Vexera continued, not to fight, but to understand. The breaking point was personal and collective. Each rescued child was a living contradiction to the Zortak's belief system. They were proving that potential was not about predetermined genetic markers or military training, but about opportunity, curiosity, and the capacity to reimagine oneself. Zurich's latest communication included a musical composition, a complex piece that integrated Zortak mathematical principles with human emotional expression. It was a language beyond words, a bridge between two civilizations that had known only conflict. Krasnak realized with a mixture of terror and reluctant admiration that the humans had done something impossible. They hadn't conquered through destruction. They had transformed through understanding. His daughters were no longer just his children. They had become something more. Ambassadors of a possibility the Zortak had never conceived. The invasion was over. But the real transformation was just beginning. The diplomatic chamber on the neutral space station Harmony Prime was unlike any negotiation in galactic history. Instead of military leaders or political representatives, the primary negotiators were children. 12 Zortak youth, ranging from 8 to 16 standard cycles, sat opposite an equal number of human children. Behind them, a carefully selected group of adult advisors watched with a mixture of anticipation and barely contained anxiety. Zurich, now 15, took the lead. Her communication was a masterful blend of Zortak precision and human emotional intelligence. "We are not here to discuss conquest," she began, her translation implant converting her complex biological communication into clear, nuanced language. "We are here to propose a new approach to interspecies interaction." The chamber's holographic displays came alive with collaborative research projects, cultural exchange programs, and innovative solutions to problems that had previously seemed insurmountable. These were not the negotiations of conquered and conquerors, but of potential partners. Captain Alina Rodriguez watched from the sidelines, the architect of a plan so audacious that it had transformed an entire potential genocide into a diplomatic opportunity. Each of these children represented a living bridge between two civilizations that had known only conflict. The human children complemented the Zortak presentations. A young girl named Maya demonstrated a joint ecological restoration project that combined Zortak mathematical precision with human creative problem-solving. Another child, Kai, showed how their collaborative medical research could revolutionize treatment for diseases affecting both species. Supreme Tactical Executor Krasnak, now seated among the adult advisors, found himself in a position he could never have imagined. His daughters were not just participants. They were leaders in this unprecedented diplomatic effort. Traditional warfare, Zurich continued, is a failure of imagination. We propose a different metric for species interaction, one based on mutual growth, understanding, and collaborative potential. The diplomatic revolution was multifaceted. It wasn't just about preventing conflict. It was about creating a new framework for interspecies relationships. The children had become something far more powerful than soldiers or diplomats. They were living proof of a different possibility. Lieutenant Vexera, now a key diplomatic advisor, leaned toward Krasnak. "They are doing what centuries of military strategy could not," she whispered. "They are making peace look like the most logical option." The negotiations were not about surrender or victory. They were about reimagining what was possible. A holographic display showed the transformation in real time. Planetary resource sharing proposals, joint scientific research initiatives, cultural exchange programs that went far beyond simple translation or tourism. These children were creating a blueprint for a fundamentally new type of galactic interaction. Captain Rodriguez allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The Chamera Protocol had been about more than saving children. It had been about saving the potential of two entire civilizations. As the negotiations continued, It became clear that the real victory was not military. It was the victory of imagination, the ability to see beyond existing paradigms and create something entirely new. The invasion was over, but the real journey was just beginning. 5 standard cycles after the invasion that never was, the galaxy watched in collective amazement. The Zortak Human Collaborative Research Station orbited a previously contested star system, a living testament to the most unprecedented diplomatic transformation in galactic history. What had begun as a potential genocide had become a blueprint for interspecies cooperation that would reshape civilization's understanding of conflict resolution. Supreme Tactical Executor Krasnak stood at the central observation deck, his once rigid exoskeleton now fitted with adaptive interfaces that reflected his transformed perspective. His twin daughters, Zurich and Zarak, worked nearby, one developing quantum communication protocols, the other leading a groundbreaking xenobotanical research team. "We were wrong," he said quietly to Captain Elena Rodriguez, who stood beside him. The words carried the weight of generations of military doctrine, completely dismantled. Elena's smile was knowing but not triumphant. "Conflict is always a failure of understanding," she replied, echoing the very lesson the rescued children had learned and now taught. The Chamara Protocol was no longer a military strategy. It had become a fundamental approach to interspecies interaction that was rapidly being adopted by other civilizations across the galaxy. Universities, diplomatic corps, and research institutions studied it as a revolutionary model of conflict prevention. Zarik, now a lead diplomatic strategist, presented a holographic overview of their collaborative achievements: planetary restoration projects, shared medical research that had eliminated 3 major diseases, educational exchange programs that were creating a new generation of truly galactic citizens. "Our strength," Zarik explained during a galactic broadcast, "is not in our ability to destroy, but in our capacity to understand." The children extracted during the invasion, now young adults, had become something unprecedented. They were not soldiers. They were not diplomats in the traditional sense. They were bridges, living examples of a possibility that transcended the narrow definitions of their original cultures. Lieutenant Vexera, now a key architect of interspecies policy, reviewed the data. The numbers were staggering. Collaborative research output had increased by 427%. Conflict resolution times had dropped by 92%. Economic exchanges between previously hostile civilizations had expanded exponentially. Captain Rodriguez understood the true victory. It was never about winning a war. It was about creating a framework where war became unnecessary. In the research station's central garden, a carefully designed space that blended Zortak and human botanical concepts, young scientists from multiple species worked side by side. Children played together, their differences becoming sources of curiosity rather than conflict. Krasnak watched his daughters. They were nothing like the warriors he had once envisioned. They were something far more powerful, architects of a new kind of civilization. "We took their children," he murmured, remembering the initial invasion. "And in doing so, they transformed us." The galaxy listened and learned. The invasion was over, but the real journey of understanding had only just begun.